When a father, an ex-football player, demanded his 6-year-old son lose some fat and shape up, he forced him to run on a treadmill. This run was so over the top and so much more than the boy could handle that there was no coming back from it. Today we have the tragic story of a child who was forced to run on a treadmill by his father who said he had gotten too fat. But we won't really get the whole scope of the story unless we talk about his parents and his upbringing first. First off, let's start out by talking about his father. Christopher Gregor seemed like he was on the road to a pretty bright future. In fact, all the way up to high school, he was a somewhat model student. When he attended the Monroe Township High School, he even became an honor student and played on the school's football team. He played as an all-state defensive lineman for the school's 2009 state championship team, according to some now-deleted archives from the school's website. In high school, Christopher was even picked up to be one of the school district's few representatives in the Heroes and Cool Kids program, a program where high school students who were considered to be stand-up role models would mentor middle school students. After high school, Christopher moved on to Wesleyan University, a liberal arts school on the smaller side out in Middleton, Connecticut. This is where he would have his first known brush with the law that very year. He broke into a female student's dorm room and stole from her. When he attempted to flee the scene, 2 other male students tried to stop him, leading to him punching them and elbowing them in the face. Eventually, though, Christopher did go on to graduate somewhere else. At the University of Arizona, an online school that used to be called Ashford University. After that, he would make his move to get a master's degree in secondary education and teaching at the Johns Hopkins University School of Education, having him move out to Baltimore. While in Baltimore, Christopher would go on to rack up quite a little list of charges against him, most of which consisted of charges related to assault, robbery, and destruction of property. However, these were far from the worst crime that Christopher committed. The worst was yet to be documented. Christopher had actually forced himself on a 16-year-old girl when he was 21 years old. To add insult to injury, he was completely unaware that he had gotten this girl pregnant. The trauma from this attack would lead the girl, Brianna Micciolo, down a pretty dark path. After giving birth to her son, which she named Corey, she would turn to drugs, mainly meth, to help deal with the trauma of what had happened to her. After a few years, and being pretty deep in the hole from her drug habit, Brianna decided to reach out to Christopher and tell him that he had a son, hoping to get some child support out of it. Willingly bringing a guy like Christopher back into her life in any shape or form would prove to be the biggest mistake she had ever made. In 2018, when Corey was 4 years old, Christopher came to know of his existence for the very first time. Christopher was currently still in Baltimore, still trying to get his master's degree. A paternity test was conducted, and it was shown that Corey was indeed his son. What Brianna didn't predict would be that Christopher and his family would immediately demand custody of Corey and take him into their home. It wasn't hard to do, given Brianna's drug habit, as she not only lost custody but even her visitation rights as well over time. For the next several years, Christopher would go on to hop around from job to job. These jobs took him everywhere from Florida to New Jersey to Maryland, as he worked as everything from a teacher to a realtor to a salesman for the NHL's Tampa Bay Lightning, and even a damn crisis hotline counselor. While he officially listed himself as being a real estate agent, it seemed that he actually settled on being a teacher. While Christopher would be teaching, his parents would tend to Corey during the day, take him back and forth to the bus stop, and help him with homework. In 2021, Brianna finally went to rehab and reportedly got clean from drugs. From that point onward, she seems to have regained visitation as she did start seeing her son again. She saw a lot of warning signs in relation to Corey's condition very early on. One day, he came over to visit her with a busted lip. Christopher said that it had happened while playing soccer, which seemed like a fair enough answer, but it didn't end there. Text messages between Christopher and Brianna show that, at the very least, Corey's safety wasn't much of a concern for Christopher. At one point, Corey was left crying after his father smacked a football out of his hand, saying that it happened after asking him about his football days. Christopher said, in the text, "Well, that's a lie. I smacked the ball out of his hand and he didn't say a word to me, acting as if Corey wasn't even hurt, but then coming to say, maybe he needs to be a little tougher because that's soft tissue." Christopher and Brianna would come to be embroiled in a custody war. Brianna even begged CPS to come and take Corey away from him. She told the New Jersey Child Protective Services that Corey was coming home with bruises and even that Christopher was forcing him to run on a treadmill as punishment, but nothing was done. Christopher had his own side to the story, saying that Brianna was nothing but a lying drug addict. He even had a story about how he was once arrested for probation after Brianna and her family planted marijuana on him. It was during this battle that everything really went past the point of no return. March 20th, 2021. Christopher took Corey out to the Atlantic Heights Clubhouse Fitness Center, the gym attached to his apartment complex. Telling Corey, now 6 years old, that he was getting too fat, he demanded that he get on the treadmill and start running. On the footage, Christopher is seen walking over to Corey as he runs alone on the treadmill. Christopher then leans in, turning up the speed on the machine. This is too much for Corey, causing him to trip and fall down, being thrown off the treadmill backwards towards his dad's feet. Christopher then picks Corey back up and puts him on the treadmill once again, increasing the speed even further as well as the incline. Corey then falls again and again as the speed and exhaustion is too much for him while Christopher merely watches over him. Eventually he lowers the speed so that Corey can run, but his frustration is very clear on the video. At one point in the video, it's said that he has even seen actually biting Corey on the head as some sort of bizarre punishment. In the end, Christopher leaves the gym, frustrated with Corey trailing behind him. Giving Christopher's expression, he almost seems surprised that Corey is even following him out. When Corey went to see his mother again on April 1st, she noticed the bruises all over his body, even on his face and forehead. She made another call to the New Jersey CPS that very morning, but nothing was done. She took Corey out to a pediatrician to have him evaluated, but the doctor found no serious health problems, only bruising and scrapes consistent with falling. Corey then told the doctor that his dad had been making him run on the treadmill because he was too fat. Brianna filed an emergency application for custody, fearing for Corey's safety, but it was rejected. The court said, "The court does not find that Corey is in danger of imminent and irreparable harm. Therefore, the court does not find a temporary modification of the parties' custody and parenting time arrangement appropriate at this time." Defeated, Brianna was left with no choice but to drop Corey back off at Christopher's apartment the next morning at 9 a.m., the morning of April 2nd, 2021. She would never see Corey again. At around 10 a.m., Christopher called a child services worker, furious, saying that Brianna had been coaching Corey into lying about him, with Corey supposedly telling him that directly. Over the phone, he said, "My son came back this morning and he was saying that his mom said that he had to tell the doctor that I hit him. He came home and one of the first two things he said was, 'I don't want to go with Mom anymore. She's going to try to take me away from you.' And he also said, 'Mom told me to lie and I had to.'" It isn't known what happened throughout the rest of the day until later in the afternoon. Shortly before 3 p.m., Corey woke up from a nap, feeling nauseated, slurring his speech, having trouble breathing, and stumbling around. Christopher called Brianna to say that he was going to take him out to the hospital. Shortly after, Christopher was seen on CCTV footage in the hospital lobby, carrying Corey's limp body up to the front desk. Hospital staff reported that he seemed emotionless, simply leaving Corey, returning briefly, and then leaving the hospital again. A nurse on duty at the time said that Corey was taking dire, almost end-of-life breaths, even saying that Corey showed no signs of being verbal. She said that his head simply fell backward as he was brought into the examination room. He was an all-hands-on-deck situation, she said. Corey was taken in to have a CT scan, but during the scan he suffered a massive seizure, leaving him on the edge of life and death. As the hospital staff began measures to bring Corey back to life, Christopher casually walked out of the room, leaving him to pass away surrounded by strangers. He was officially pronounced dead shortly after. Hospital staff came out to tell Christopher what had happened, leading to a brief showing of emotion. However, shortly after, Christopher simply got into his car and drove away from the hospital. The police were called to come out. They had asked the doctors what exactly happened to the boy, but even they were a little stumped at the time. They were only able to tell the police that they think he passed away from internal bleeding, but nothing was really sure yet. And for a while, this would be the case. Later on, an autopsy was performed, showing that Corey had passed away from a combination of blunt force injuries, cardiac and liver contusions, acute inflammation, and sepsis, likely resulting from the multiple hard falls on the treadmill. 3 months later, the police were able to find this out for themselves, coming across the surveillance footage from the gym. As a result, they arrested Christopher on charges of child neglect out in Tennessee. Upon arrest, he blamed Corey's mother, telling the police, "If he didn't have a drug addict mother, then he'd still be alive. That's been going through my head this whole drive. She's a special kind of dirtbag."
I knew when he got home he was tweaking, and I knew something was wrong with my gut, but I just thought she had home waiting from everything that he needed sleep. And I should have took him right from the beginning. There's a lot of me things like, it's partially my fault in the sense that if they truly did something, it wouldn't, he would have a shoot right from his drug addict mother, but he'd still be alive if I never came back from Baltimore to fight for custody. And that's been going through my head this whole drive. She's special kind of dirtbag.
However, things wouldn't end there. In September of 2021, a forensic pathologist came to determine that Corey's death should be listed as homicide due to chronic child abuse, theorizing that the injuries from the treadmill may have not been the only ones at play, even citing that he may have been hit on the day that he died. Then, in March of 2022, Christopher Gregor was finally arrested on a charge of murder. Due to how strange the treadmill aspect of this case was, the case quickly made headlines around the United States, with Christopher being branded as Treadmill Dad. People were more than ready to see Treadmill Dad hit with some hefty charges, and they awaited the day he would finally show up in court. Eventually, that day finally came. As most trials surrounding a custody battle tend to go, this murder trial came with a lot of accusations being thrown back and forth. Christopher's lawyers planned to argue that Corey's injuries were simply the result of normal boyish roughhousing. They said, "As a matter of fact, the treadmill incident was on March 20th, and between March 20th and April 2nd, Corey spent a significant amount of time with Brianna, spent a significant amount of time with Christopher, and actually tried out for a flag football team out here in Ocean County. I submit to you those bruises did occur from the treadmill, they occurred from football, they occurred from boys being boys." Christopher's legal team began to speculate that Corey's injuries might have actually resulted from the aggressive cardiopulmonary resuscitation that the doctors and nurses attempted on him for about 49 minutes straight in an attempt to revive him. They even challenged that he might have died from an infection, although they didn't really have anything to base that on evidence-wise. His attorney, Mario Gallucci, told the jury that Corey's death was pretty consistent with symptoms of pneumonia. Prosecutors weren't really having it, however. They stated that there was no evidence of anything occurring beyond the original treadmill incident. While admitting that there was no evidence of any other abuse occurring, they did say that the footage of that day alone was pretty indicative of an ongoing cycle of such treatment. They argued that Christopher may have even hit Corey on the same day that he came home and told him that his mother had been coaching him to lie as some sort of punishment, given that it was after that incident that he needed medical attention. Corey's mother came to testify as well, speaking of her run-ins with CPS and how she had seen bruises all over Corey, leading her to taking him to the doctor and applying for emergency custody, which the court themselves denied. While she was on the stand, the jurors were shown the security camera footage from that day on the treadmill, with Brianna barely able to even watch. They were able to count 6 hard falls in total on the treadmill that day, with Corey falling onto his chest and abdomen each time. Christopher's lawyer brought up that Brianna had texted her boyfriend the day her son died, asking him to get her some meth. Brianna said that she didn't go back to doing drugs that day. Gallucci then asked, "But you wanted to?" To which she responded, "Oh yeah, I was very upset about my son being abused." The lawyer then brought up that Brianna and her friends had vandalized Christopher's parents' home shortly after Corey had died. He asked her if she had indeed thrown eggs and dead fish at the home, saying, "So you were throwing rocks, dead fish, bones, and eggs at Christopher's parents' house?" And she responded that yes, she did. As the trial played out, Christopher continually called his parents in order to try and coach them in how to testify during the trial. He got a hold of his mother in particular, telling her what to say. She repeatedly told him to stop, knowing that it was against the rules, leading to Christopher's father taking the phone away and hanging up on him. The court was left to decide whether or not they could even take testimony from Christopher's mom into admission at that point, and after some deliberation, they decided that they couldn't. In the end, only Christopher's father, David, came up to testify. He said that he last saw Corey on March 22nd, 2 days after the treadmill incident. This was when he and his wife came out to show Christopher some prospective homes that he might want to purchase. He said that Corey seemed happy and energetic that day, but did notice a big bruise on his forehead. Finally, after a 4-week-long trial, a decision was made on May 31st of 2024. While Christopher had originally been charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment, he was found not guilty on the murder charge. Instead, he was found guilty of aggravated manslaughter given the method in which his son had died. Had Christopher been convicted on the murder charge, he was facing life in prison. However, with this manslaughter charge, he was more likely looking at getting a 10 to 30-year sentence. Given that he was also found guilty of endangering the welfare of a child, it was likely that this was going to be on the higher end. When the verdict was finally announced, Christopher was seen slightly shaking his head back and forth in disappointment. Meanwhile, Brianna broke out into tears. She told the media, "We're happy with the verdict and we thank the prosecutor's office. He deserves to be in jail. He's a very bad man." The prosecutor, Bradley Billheimer, spoke out as well, saying, "At long last, justice for Corey has been accomplished. Christopher Gregor must live the rest of his life with the knowledge that he and he alone was responsible for the death of his one and only son. While nothing can bring this precious child back to his family, we hope that today's jury verdict offers some semblance of peace and closure for those who knew and loved Corey." Christopher's lawyer, Mario Gallucci, said that he and his client were not surprised by the verdict, saying, "He knows it was just the first step in a long battle." He said that he and his client absolutely planned to appeal the jury's verdict. They were confident enough in their appeal that they rejected a 30-year plea offer, instead leaving Christopher to face 40 years in prison. It currently isn't known how successful that appeal will be, but many are doubtful it will really go anywhere. Christopher was thrown into Ocean County Jail without bond, left to rot away for the foreseeable future. After the 4-week trial and nearly 3.5 years since Corey died, Christopher Gregor's sentence was finally decided upon. The judge, Guy P. Ryan, gave him 20 years for manslaughter and 5 more years for child endangerment. The sentences are to run consecutively, meaning he will have to finish the manslaughter sentence before starting the child endangerment sentence. In the end, he'll be serving 25 years. With New Jersey law, he would have to serve at least 85% of his sentence to ever be eligible for parole. While the prosecutors had hoped that he would end up with the maximum possible sentence of 40 years, it's been said that what they call Christopher's limited criminal history made him ineligible for the whole run. At this rate, Christopher will most likely be in prison until he is around 60 years old. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Just recently, I've started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you find this channel interesting, I think you might like that one too. I've also opened up a merch store. There you can get some cool Dire Trip related t-shirts. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media, and I appreciate it when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you can get all the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.